All right, I'm going to start the recording so that
Yeah, I'll stop drinking beer because it's for your recording, so it's official.
so I'd like to just welcome and thank Dr. Greg Crutsinger for joining us. I've known Greg for a few years here now. Gosh, I think maybe 2014 or so, we got connected through Dr. Andrew Shepard at Sinclair Community College. That time, I believe you were at 3D robotics. So just some backstory. Dr. Crutsinger has a strong academic background. He worked in academia and then came over into industry and has been with many of the influential multi-rotor and UAS, small UAS companies. 3D Robotics, Parrot, Pix 4D. And then he broke out on his own and started developing Scholar Farms, which is something we're going to learn about today with the use of data that's collected from unmanned aircraft systems in the civil side of things. So now he's moving on to is it GeoAcuity? Is that it?
I've been working with GeoAcuity the past year. I'll talk about that a bit, but I'm actually moving to Planet Labs to do more on the satellite side of things. So microsats, but same kind of data concepts.
Outstanding. And that's something I think the class would kind of love to hear is the ability to move in field. How, because our degree is connected to not just unmanned aircraft systems, but it's also the connectivity, the commonality that exists among the operational domains. So space, air, ground, maritime, they're all interconnected, interrelated. While they have their unique elements, they also have a lot of overlap where knowledge, skills, and abilities that are developed in a career in one area can be adapted over to those other areas. And I think, what you're talking about and what you're now pursuing is a great example of that. So with that, I will, I guess if you'd like to kind of just fill us in on how you got into
for sure.
systems.
Yeah, so here's my kind of wandering career path, and it continues to wander. So I started out in academia. I did my PhD. I'm an ecologist, actually. I study plants and insects, basically, and bugs that eat plants. I did that for about 10 years. I did my PhD at the University of Tennessee, and then I went to Berkeley for a postdoc, and then I was a professor for about 5 years at the University of British Columbia up in Canada, in Vancouver. And then I left academia to join the commercial drone industry. So I joined 3D Robotics and was their academic kind of program director, working with schools and universities, building programs in UAS. And then I broke out into Scholar Farms. I did mostly focused on how do we start applying the hardware and thinking more about the data and thinking more about vegetation mapping. Leveraging my plant background. And mostly I worked in agriculture and continue to work in agriculture because there's money in agriculture. But I've worked a lot with ecological monitoring, thinking about here in California, thinking about forests and wildfires and a lot of those kind of aspects. And then I've moonlighted in disasters. That's not been my main gig, but that's what I'll talk about. I've led some of the data side for some of the biggest disaster responses for unmanned systems globally. So I'll talk a bit today about the campfire and mapping paradise, which is been one of the major incidents. But for the most part, my world looks like this. So it's I'm flying and mapping mostly for vegetation mapping. This is some coffee work in Hawaii. I'm actually flying to Kauai tomorrow, not for drone work. It's my anniversary, so we're going to Kauai. But I think mostly about multispectral and color imagery, the data side of drones. I've hosted a lot of different workshops and thinking about the data side around kind of how do you take imagery and extract valuable information out of it. I kind of fell into the disaster side, mostly working with law enforcement teams who needed a data analyst to come in and say like, okay, they know how to fly, but who's going to put all these pieces together, take all the SD cards, all the photos, stitch them into maps, merge the maps, put it all into something that is useful. And I've done that now for 5 major wildfires here in California. It's not something that like, it's kind of a stressful thing that I do, but we've been successful kind of in spite of ourselves. I'll talk a bit about that. For the past year, actually, I've been doing more DoD work. So for during kind of the age of COVID, when I wasn't like homeschooling a first grader, I've been working with the Institute of Creative Technologies. If you don't know about that group, they're out of the USC, University of Southern California. They're called ICT. They do a lot of R&D for the Army. So we've been working a lot on the One World Terrain project, if you know that project. So like rapid 3D mapping for using small UAS, and then simulated environments for navigation through a village, for example. So you go in, rapidly map it, and then you can place, it basically turns it into a video game. So you can place a active sniper, or you can determine where you would place explosives and blast radius and et cetera, but mostly around 3D. So that's what I've been working on for the past year. It's a pretty interesting group of people. If you're interested more on applying kind of the data side of things, is look up ICT out of the University of Southern California. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of how I got into disaster mapping and the application of it. But for the most part, all the UAVs, all the vehicles are going to be off the shelf kind of platforms. And then it's mostly how do you take hundreds and hundreds of gigs of data and make something useful. I got into it. I started with the Ghost Ship fire. This was a fire in a nightclub that happened in Oakland in California. I'm in the East Bay here in the Bay Area. This was a nightclub that burned down, and there was about 30 fatalities. It was a couple of years ago, and there was a lot of pressure around it, and they wanted to map it to see as the building shifted before they go in and remove some of the bodies. And so I knew the law enforcement teams. They called me up just trying to get some basic advice on the data, and then that locked me in as like the guy they know and whose cell phone number that they have. And so when all these other events happened, so Santa Rosa burned down, that was about 3,500 homes. I came in and helped them map and stitch all the data for Coffee Park, which was one of the big damaged neighborhoods. Redding burned down, that was about 1,200 homes. Paradise, that was 15,000 or something like that, 18,000. And then since then, last year during the really active fire season, we did 2 more. We did another series up in Butte County, that was Berry Creek and Feather Falls. That was about 3,500 homes. And then recently the last fire was Santa Cruz, which was another 1,200 homes. So all told, I've mapped like 30,000 burned structures in the past couple of years. And we do it all mostly with law enforcement and fire teams flying small UAVs. So basically I fell into it because I was like the guy they know, and then they just keep calling me. And so far I haven't said no, but I'm getting close. So this year it's a crazy drought, and it's all, we're already getting red flag warnings. So I think it's going to be just another, we'll see what burns down this year. And I didn't expect California to continue to burn down. So I've never really planned that we'll continue doing this work, but it's something that just keeps happening. And now it's like, okay, it's time to scale this whole process. So here's one of the teams I work with. This is the Alameda County Sheriff's Office. They're one of the most active drone teams in the country, mostly though for like rapid deployment, search warrants, accident scene reconstruction, crime scene mapping. So mostly they're looking for a live feed, or they're mapping small areas. And so I mainly come in when it's time to like pool lots of teams together, and they hand me all the data. This was Paradise. That was 15 drone teams from law enforcement and fire and a bunch of different agencies. You can see me down in the lower left. I stand out as like the nerdy data person wearing flannel, while everybody else is like, I don't know, uniformed and professional. But it's like a world that like I get along well with these folks because I'm like not like an alpha male kind of guy. Like I'm a plant biologist, but they're pretty like, I mean, you guys are like in the military, so I would imagine it's fairly similar, but like I'm like the nerdy guy that comes in, but they like trust me because I'm not very intimidating, and also I'm pretty self-deprecating in my humor. So as long as they can make fun of me and I laugh, then like usually we get along pretty well. But it's been pretty amazing what we've been able to do in terms of just deploying and then combining the data side with the operations side. So I help support like the team operations, but for the most part, like self-organizing into groups and deploying, like I don't deal with as much. What I deal with is like, okay, where's your SD cards? And like, how do I take it from here? And how do you hand it off to someone like me? So there's these two sides of things. One's like safety procedural, and then the other is like data visualization and communication to the stakeholders. And we work side by side. There's an air boss and there's a data boss, and they work together. If that makes sense. This is all during a time when drones are super sensitive for like working in active wildfire zones. Like obviously there's a lot of public folks flying near wildfires. It's gained a pretty bad reputation, but we've been able to go in, work with the CAL FIRE, the big agency, and been able to access closed or restricted airspace and do it professionally. And that's basically why we've used public agencies instead of professional companies, is really they're the ones that have the access to get in relative to, dronedudes.com or whatever coming in. So I'll tell you a little bit about Paradise. So Paradise Fire started in the upper right up here by Polga. And it spread and basically blasted down. This is the first day of the fire in blue, and burned all of Concal, Magalia, and Paradise. Really in that first 24 hours is where just everything went up, blowing through the entire valley. And that's where you saw all the videos of everyone just trying to get out with flames kind of everywhere. But the most of the damage and all of the fatalities happened really within that first 24 hours where the winds picked up and it just raced through. And then it spread out into more of the rural areas over the coming days. So we came in about 4-5 days, I think, after the fire. So here's a satellite picture. And if you cut through this, that first day, you can just see it blowing in, just incinerating basically the entire valley. I mean, it was burning, a football field like every, 10 seconds or something insane. So when we were asked to come up, so it was through the mutual aid systems, local law enforcement teams requested aid, and then other law enforcement teams came in. But because this was such a national incident, it was at the time where they weren't sure how many people were caught in the fire. And so, they thought, oh, okay, there's dozens and dozens killed, but there were thousands still on the missing persons list. So they were going through home by home, property by property, just really trying to assess risk. And so when we showed up, the search area kind of looked like this, where they were going through and clearing the homes here in yellow, but there was a huge area still to come. A lot of the work that comes into this on my part is just preparation. Like, how do we prepare to go in and just build this giant data funnel coming off of the drones? There's a ton of stuff that goes into the safety side. So getting airspace permission, working with the air attack teams who are still putting out fires, figuring out how many teams we need to cover how much area. And then the data side is like, what apps, what drones, how many drones, how are we going to process it all? How many people do we need? We're kind of constant communication. I'm just trying to figure out how much time it is, like how quickly do you need this turned around? Who's the data going to? All those pieces have to be kind of put together, at least into a framework, and before we show up. But a lot of it is still just kind of flying the plane as we build it. A lot of running to Best Buy, getting hard drives, getting SD cards, printing off a lot of maps. So even though we do stuff a lot digitally on our phone, I'm still running to Kinko's and printing off tons of stuff or using the printing groups that are part of the Office of Emergency Services that printing off maps and booklets. We're trying to do it. The more you can pre-plan the deployment of where people should fly and what data should be captured, the faster you'll just get people out into the field and not just standing around, being frustrated. So I am on the ground with the teams. So I'm out in the field with them. It's usually, this is actually in 2018. So it's not like COVID mass. It's just super smoky and terrible conditions with trees falling and power lines. And it's just like the weird plastics degassing. It's not like a fun place to be. And we're setting up usually in a parking lot or in a base location, and then usually centralized, and then everyone kind of deploys from there. The initial request was about 2,000 acres, which to me is fairly reasonable to do with small UAVs. I can map, 100 to 200 acres at a time with teams, and we could get half that valley pretty easily. That ultimately changed kind of over time to being around 17,000 acres, which seemed impossible. But we started with each of these areas in red is a burned out structure. So you can see it was, a couple of thousand structures within the town that they wanted us to map. And that was like the core areas that they were sending search teams at the time. So here's a couple of lessons learned from this. So I just prepare that it's just everything is going to go wrong usually in the first half a day. As we figure things out, it's just like one problem after another. Smoke is a major issue, just visibility. And in fact, often manned aircraft aren't flying, the air operations aren't flying because the visibility is just so low. And in this case, like UAVs are the best tool for the job because we can fly up at 100 feet or 200 feet, still get a panorama or a visual, and we don't have to worry about airspace restrictions because nothing else is flying when the smoke conditions are that bad. And it just hung out in the valley for about a week. It was pretty horrendous. They capped us at about 200 feet, and ultimately they raised it to about 300 feet, which was good because the trees are about 180 feet tall. So if you cap me at 200 feet, like I can't see a drone as soon as it flies 20 feet away. At 300 feet, I could better see them. And we're supposed to maintain visual line of sight, even though it's a disaster zone. That's flying under the COA. That's kind of the rules. The smoke would also break all the maps. And so that was another problem, was like, we're flying at 300 feet, but the smoke kind of dilutes all the pixels of a photo. So trying to stitch it all together, that was a problem. And then resolution, I was trying to do a rapid stitch and they didn't like the resolution. They're used to that real high resolution drone data. And at the time, Pix4D React or some of the other tools weren't stitching at full resolution. And they wanted that full resolution kind of view of all the damaged areas. And so it was just a problem. And they also updated the map. So that it went from here where they were going through and listing all the damaged structures to this, which is just like, okay, here's 2,000 acres. Okay, here's like 10,000. And it's not 1,500 burned homes, it's 15,000. And so there's a lot of poor community, as you know, in big government agencies under stressful conditions, it's hard to get like relevant information and talk to the right people, but it just like turned into something much bigger than I thought it was going to be. The other problem was like the president came in and shut down the airspace. And so we were basically grounded for like the entire day as he came up. But actually the benefit of that was it allowed us to like take a step back and take a breath and say like, okay, this is much bigger than we thought it was going to be. Let's just like take a day and really plan it out and then figure out like, how are we going to do this like properly? And that actually saved us an incredible amount of time. It's just taking a breath, letting the adrenaline subside, letting the pressure and the stress of it, and just really thinking it out. So we did basically the parameters were this. They wanted a map of the entire area of Paradise and Magalia, which was the other town. They wanted full resolution maps. We had 15 teams arriving on Monday, basically after a week after the fire, lots of different agencies. And then it was right before Thanksgiving. So we only had 2 days of teams to come in, and then the rains were coming, and that was gonna like create floods and what mudslides and all this kind of stuff. So it was like a fairly daunting task. I mean, the only thing they could have made it harder was like, all right, and do it like in the nude or something like that. But the weather cleared out, so a lot of the wind picked up just a little bit, blew out the smoke, but didn't drop all the trees on our heads. I asked a lot of help from the industry during this time. We didn't have a seamless workflow, so had help from different companies, and that was just being in the drone industry. I could call lots of folks up and say, hey, what's the best way to do this? Hey, can you help us out? Can you give me a count? Can I run data to you, etc. We were able to pre-plan out just really different zones that we could deploy all the teams to, and pre-plan all the missions. So I can, in drone deploy and some of the other software, I can set up folders of missions and I can share them with your phone. And that way, when you show up, I'm just giving you a zone. And if you finish it, I'm going to assign you another zone, and it's already on your phone because I already shared that whole folder with you. And that way you can say, okay, I'm on zone B. You call me up. Hey, I finished zone B. All right, do zone H. And then you can move on to the next one and really crank that out. So we pre-planned all the missions ahead of time. And that way it was really seamless. You don't have to even think about planning your mission. You just have to drive to the next one, launch the drone, and keep an eye on it. Each zone was about 300 acres or a couple of batteries. We tried to make it manageable for teams. And then again, this is just kind of the list of, you can pull up a folder in the area and you can tag a zone, and that way you can just keep cranking all day long with collecting all the data. So we basically went to a parking lot, assigned all the teams, assigned their zones, and then we could track them with a master map of where they're at any given time, and then cross off their zones as they finish, and they would come back and bring the data back to me. So I have a chain of custody for the data. So there's a whole safety AirBoss tracking all the safety side of things. But then once I get the data, you basically walk away as a pilot. You hand me the SD card, and then you walk away. And I keep it really simple. So I have this Ziploc. So this is my biology days of like managing field crews. So you come in, you drop off your SD card, you write your zone and the date and the team. I put a red sticker on it. Red means it's hot. It's not backed up. It means that if you lose that SD card, you've lost like 4 hours of one team's time. I take the data, I cross them off the list and check off the zone, and then I back up all the data, and then I put a green sticker on it. That means the data have been backed up, and that SD card is basically safe at that point. And then I reback the data 2 more times. So I always have 3 copies of the data at any given time as I'm tracking it, because if I lose photos, and like those little SD cards are like the Lord of the Rings ring, like they want to get lost, they want to get dropped in the grass with the ash and everything. And so, the most important thing for me is just to like make sure that any given time, I always know where all the data is at and it's backed up. It's never on just one hard drive. It's never on just one computer. And I always keep a hard drive with me the whole time. Anytime we're out there, that hard drive never leaves like my side. And so if I'm going to hand off data to somebody else, a runner, it's always backed up. Even if you got to sit there for 45 minutes at the end of the day, it's always backed up. So this is me backing up data basically, and drinking Red Bull. I drink a lot of Red Bull during these events until my heart, lately my heart started palpitating. So I know I'm just like, I'm over the age of 40 and getting too old for this stuff. I also have had, it really helps to have, I've had volunteers working on the data side of things, and they're actually tracking folders. So there's a whole structure to foldering all the data so that this is the team, this is the zone, this is the date, these are the photos. That way, if there's anything that goes wrong, you can go back to that whole folder and data structure. It's the most important, boring aspect of the job, is just managing all the information and make sure it's in the right folder, the right way to query it. And it goes from me just crossing stuff off on a pad to like a nice organized structure. That way you don't lose the information. This is all like, I think we'll look back in 5 years and be like, oh, I can't believe we did all this. Now it just like goes to the cloud instantaneously. but we're still in the like, take the SD card out, put it in the bag, upload it, back it up kind of world. It's changing quickly, but and then we did a sneaker net. So instead of trying to work in a disaster zone, every day for the 2 days, I would have somebody drive up to Paradise, or they were there for the day to help me. And then they would drive the data down to San Francisco, and we would just hotwire it into Drone Deploy's servers. So we had Drone Deploy just staying up all night, batch loading everything for us. And that way, all the maps would start popping up on the app. And by the next morning, the previous day's data were stitched, even though it was, 150 gigs of photos. It was easier, instead of trying to use crappy hotel Wi-Fi or do it locally, computer to computer or server to server. It's easier just to get to gigabit Ethernet and just blast it into the cloud and get it processing, basically, and use Amazon servers to do it. And that's what we've done ever since. So like when the recent fire that was up here, it was up, this is Paradise, it was up here on this other side of the valley. We actually drove to Chico and took their GIS lab, their geospatial lab, that the students typically use. And I took 25 computers, and I would just like drop folders on each computer's desktop, and then I would just load them at 25 computers at a time to the cloud. And they had like 500 megabit data uplinks or something that was pretty good. But it was like, we had to get special permission from the dean because of COVID or whatnot. But I'm always just trying to get to the fastest internet possible and as many uplinks as I can as possible, and just pour the data into the cloud. Then we're tracking all the progress. So I always need to know, like, okay, I have to tell the teams, and I have to tell the stakeholders, like, how long is this going to take and where are we at? And because I'm using cloud processing, I can say, okay, we got 26 of 32 maps that are done from day one. We got another 42 maps coming for the next day. So I should be done in the next like 48 hours to have all the data layers together, and something that's like able to merge all the maps and then upload it. So I'm trying to track that at any given time and keep communicating that to the stakeholders involved. So I can track it from the field. Usually in these fires, AT&T and Verizon bring in those portable cell signals, or we have a satellite uplink, or soon, like with Elon Musk, we'll just be able to have those old dishes or whatever and uplink. But I'm trying to just figure out where we're at and communicate that to the teams. In Drone Deploy, now I use Site Scan from Esri, but in Drone Deploy, you can see when the maps turn green, then I know they're finished, and I can see those and see these little sections popping up, and I'll know, okay, that section's done. Let's move on to the next section. And if it fails, because of smoke or from some other reason, I can say, hey, we got to go redo this because the conditions were too bad. From there, then we were able to piece together this puzzle piece of all of the main sections of Paradise. And then Drone Deploy, a guy from Drone Deploy, went through, and then he designed these little gap missions for us in a folder called gaps. And then at the end of the last day, we should just assign all the gaps so that we could fill it all into one cohesive map. So people were flying for like 6 or 7 minutes at a time, but it was going to tie it all together. I didn't want it to be this blotchy map that looked kind of hacked together. It still looked a little hacked together, but that's kind of how we designed it all, was with these little gap missions to fill it all in. So that was kind of the team. Ultimately, we put the pieces together. Drone Deploy was able to merge all of the map layers together. And then we did hundreds of panoramas over all of it. And then we traced every major road with geospatial video. So you just sync the flight log, the location that the drone flew, with the video. I'll show you a little bit of that in a bit. We merged it all together. I made a little technical YouTube tutorial, and then we put it out to the public on Thanksgiving Day and crashed everybody's websites with hundreds of thousands of views. And it was still a week before people could go home to their homes. So people were really thankful. Now we start seeing a lot of imagery showing up in like GoFundMe and a lot of other sites out there. But this was the biggest success of like all these teams kind of coming in, lots of different industry partners, everybody pooling together and then turning it around within like 24 to 48 hours, finished product, totally public, pushing it out there. You know, it was basically crowdsourcing a disaster. So all told, we did about 500 flights, 70,000 photos, about a half a terabyte of data. We did 26 square miles with Phantoms and Mavics, and then hundreds of panoramas. It was incredible that we could turn all that information around and visualize it in record time, basically. And it was a team effort. You know, it's like, I typically think of the commercial drone industry as kind of like, they're kind of, it's kind of Silicon Valley in the world that I'm in, but everybody helped out. And like, in the end, like we all worked together and made it happen. And we pushed it out to a lot of different stakeholders out there. I will say that like the stress of all these events kind of lingers on me like for about a couple of weeks afterwards. And it's really like a solid week of just drinking Red Bull and plowing into data and my phone blowing up off the hook and feeling a lot of pressure of it. Like I don't get paid a lot for these kind of events. So the impact on me and just seeing burned out homes is like a sad thing. You know, people's pets died, people died, you know, kids die and these things. It's pretty tragic. The impact of it, you know, here's one of the schools up in Paradise, just seeing it all is like, it takes a couple of weeks to unpack from my perspective. I'm also like, I'm kind of a sensitive guy. Like I'm not like trained. You guys, I'm sure, are trained to be much tougher than me. So, and this one was just on a sheer scale of like, you know, it's like an entire town went up overnight. It was incredible and tragic. So I'll also say that like, this is still just a proof of concept. Even today, it's still all about the drone. So like these teams are really focused on like hardware and like, to me, there's no real standard protocols. You're showing up with different drones. Some have built-in screens, which I hate. Some can load third-party apps. Some can't. Some have good cameras. Some don't. You didn't update your iPad. You didn't update the drone. You know, who owns all the data is totally, I mean, I hand it off to the sheriff's office, but is it them or is it the GIS department? Oh, New York Times is calling. They want the data too. Who's authorized to like give them the data? Oh, is there privacy concerns? We had this last fire, we had like ginormous illegal cannabis grows. So like, are the cannabis growers going to be pissed off that we're parking like high resolution panoramas above their grows? Sheriff's office doesn't seem to care. Let's just put it out there. So it's like, okay, well, I'm the data guy, but like, what liability do I have here? Oh, there's a giant lawsuit happening. Oh, the lawyers for the lawsuit want all the data. All right, who owns the data? Like, I'm just the data guy, but I don't own the data. And then like getting reimbursed. So like there's a pathway to reimburse all these guys through mutual aid and but there's no like line item in the billing and invoicing for like the data side of things. It's like pilots and go fly, but then it's like, all right, how are you going to manage the crushing amount of information out here? And then it changes like every year. So like I just checked all my recent maps and like, oh, Hanger died as a company. Oh, all my links are broken. Okay, well, they got bought by AirMap, but AirMap's not doing panoramas. Oh, so we need a new way to do this all. Okay, we're reinventing the wheel all over again. So like the industry is moving way faster than emergency management. It's just like, how do you keep up with it? But then how do you pass all that information down? We've been doing it from a bottom up, and it really needs to be a top down, fully integrated approach, but it has to be nimble enough that you can adapt as the industry adapts, which is not how these big agencies are. So how are we doing on time, Brent?
Good.
So I just want to show you a little bit of data here. Let me stop sharing. I'll show you a little bit of the results, things that I create and the way that I think about it. I'm always trying to make the information. So like, I didn't come from a geospatial background. I'm a plant ecologist, basically. So I'm always trying to think about like, how do you merge it all together so like the public can interact with these data, and you don't have to be some GIS person or a master's degree in Esri products or whatever to interact with it and deal with it. So I'm trying to merge different pieces together, and there's 3 different pieces to it. One is just the individual panoramas. I use panoramas because the drone flies up, takes a lot of pictures. Now they stitch those photos directly on board the Mavic series. Even the Mavic Mini 2 is like the best $499 platform that's out there for panoramas in the world. And then they can land and I can visualize 50 to 100 acres right there in a panorama. I use video, syncing the video and putting that on a map. And then I use traditional maps, predominantly in 2D, some in 3D if they ask for it, but mostly they want the 3D because it looks cool. It's not quite as useful. But then there's a lot of data that you can merge together that makes the information that you're collecting from the drone more useful. And that's where I'm getting more into the satellite side and other side of things. So here's a data set that we did. I usually have attribution of like, who do you blame for this on the left-hand side. And so usually also we have technical questions you can ask for. This is standard ArcGIS Online is a platform that we're using. Each of those pins is a panorama, but I'm pulling in publicly available information from the rest of the disaster. For example, here's all the burned out homes. That's coming from CAL FIRE, where I can pull in the property boundaries. If you zoom in, I'll show you one of the other data sets. I can pull in the property boundaries and I can turn those on. So I would know, whose property is this that I'm looking over. So here's a layers list. And here you can see the different property boundaries in blue. And so I can zoom in and I can actually click on an address and I would know all the information. All that's public data from the county. I just pull it in and we're just overlaying it on top of the drone data. So you can slide and you can see, now this is updated, the satellite view, but before it would be a home here. And I can have a before and after. Now it's just an after and after, basically, after and more after. But it's it's that full resolution, 1 inch scale or 2 inch scale maps. You're able to see, most of the vehicles. You can see the structure. You can see gas tanks, and then you can do a quick slider before and after. That's a pretty useful way to visualize it. And then the property boundaries. This here, let's see, I'll show you some of the weed grows that are up here. There's just thousands and thousands of weed grows. And it's all like, it's not like hippies, it's like cartels that are up there. I'll try and see if I can find one. Here's one of them. You can see like any of these are like, you would drive by and it's just all burned out weed. Like hundreds and hundreds of farms that are up there, non-permitted. You can see it in the satellite data too. So this is basically the chunks of map that we're trying to put together. This was a really rural, very difficult to fly area, just super mountainous. So we didn't actually get that many maps in it. And you can see they're kind of puzzle pieced together. And that's where we take the panoramas and kind of complement that. So with the panoramas, I can get hundreds and hundreds of panoramas now. And I can blanket an entire area. You can get 12 to 15 per battery. And so if you have 5 or 6 teams, you're getting a couple hundred per day. And then if I click on any of the pins, I can go to the viewer. Let me see if I can pick one where this area is going to be terrible. But even here, you can zoom in on the panoramas. It's real intuitive. It's like Google Street View. And you can see basically an entire neighborhood in a single point and zoom around and see the damage. And it's complementary to the maps, but it's much faster to collect. Here's another weed grow. I mean, that's just like a random point. And it's like, it's all weed during that entire whole event. So I like to use panoramas. The other thing is video. So you can link the flight log of the drone with the video. There's a software called Survey. I like using them. And you can capture miles and miles or kilometers and kilometers of video very quickly. And here we're putting it on a map. You can do this similarly with some of the larger aircraft, but this is just using the, what is it, MISB data or BISB or whatever it's called, coming off a helicopter, for example. You can use that video. But I like to use video, but it's not as useful to me if I have entire hard drives full of videos if I don't put a geospatial context on it. you know, and being able to see where it was taken in a neighborhood off to the right here and what that flight path is, then is much more intuitive. And I can zoom in and get a quick highlight. So for example, in the video, I can see in the map off to the right where the video is taken, or I can skip to that. I can say, hey, actually show me video from over here. And then it just skips to that section of video on the map. So I think that's really useful. One of the things I did as well that wasn't made public, all these are public data layers. I'm happy to show them to you. One, or share the links with you. The newer GoPros also take video and they tag the GPS location in them. So GoPro 6 and up. So there's a, it's a $299 camera. What I did is we had some ATVs and I was able to basically put 2 GoPros on suction cups on 2 different ATVs. And I had these guys drive literally every road in this entire area, something like 250 miles of road in over 2 days. And so you're able to get this nice, I'll show you a little bit of this video. It wasn't made public because of some of the privacy concerns, basically, of such high resolution data on the ground. But here you can see, like, look, these are 2 guys that usually work in the jail, driving $300 cameras around on their ATVs. It's all super stabilized. It's dirt cheap. It could work on, it works on an ATV. It can work on a boat. It could work on a drone. It could work on a motorcycle. And we're able to just get, like, basically the best data set I've ever seen of, 3 days after a major wildfire event where there was fatalities. But if you look at the map, it's just crazy. Look at all these lines of these guys, like, driving through, just crazy dirt roads in the backcountry, and just miles and miles and miles of it. They came back, like, just totally covered in mud, basically, and dust. And the interesting thing to me is not just the GoPro video, but your potential to use machine learning and some of these other tools to really start extracting features. If you've ever looked at, like, a autonomous car, how it drives and it starts tagging everything. Here's some of the firefighters coming out. You're really able to start saying, okay, show me every down power line, show me every gate that's out there. You could use this just super dirt cheap data that you could get from any, quick trip to Best Buy for a couple $100 and just stick it on a car. And now you have hundreds and hundreds of miles of just good quality data from the ground, especially when the drones can't fly. So those are just a couple of the example data sets of how I'm thinking about how do we merge all this information together? How do you then release it and make it intuitive to interact with, so you don't have to be a professional, basically a GIS professional. You can look and zoom in and click on your neighborhood and see, the impact of the next fire or the next flood. Here, the air is a little bit clearer here in this one. I really like panoramas. They're easy. I'm gonna stop there. I've been throwing a lot at you. That's kind of my shtick in terms of, if you ever need someone to map a burned out city, I'm pretty good at the data side.
Outstanding, Greg. I knew I definitely appreciate you coming in here and sharing all this detail with the class. Last week I mentioned they saw kind of the other side, where it was the folks kind of before an event happened. A fire had just happened or it's underway. Now we can see the value of this technology and the data that can be captured after the event. I'd like to open it up to the class to offer them a chance to ask any questions.
Hey, Greg, I got a question for you.
Sure.
So in your use of the video and rendering 3D models, did anyone ever ask you to try and render something like that, just using high resolution video taken of an area?
Yeah, so, like, you can extract the frames. I tend to not use video because cutting the frames out is just lower resolution compared to the still photos. But we've done some small areas where they've flown a particular building, and then just you can load it into Pix4D or context capture, and then just crop it by every 30th frame or whatever, and start stitching the 3D. It's just, the still photos are always even on 4 to 8K, a still 20 megapixel photo is just much higher resolution still than cropping the video. The other aspect of the video is you lose that geotag. So it'll be an arbitrary coordinate system. It won't be like overlaid on a map unless you re-tag all the data from the video onto it. So it's a little bit of a pain point. But I know in Esri and some of the other softwares, there's like the, what do they call their video stitching? There's some other ways where people are starting to more overlay the video on maps, more on the 2D side of things. Did you have something in particular in mind for like a particular application for it, or?
Yeah, what's your last video with the GoPro 6 on a vehicle drive, but then when you start talking about AI ML algorithms with the geotagging, and then also when you talked about the downed infrastructure, I was thinking about utilizing like down power lines or other types of infrastructure. Like, is this bridge out? And if so, can we get a model of that just from that image to see like, oh, okay, for the planning for the repair crews to come in?
Yeah, I think to me, the first step is like, man, imagery is so data heavy. How do we like get rid of the imagery? A geotag or a location information, like that's like a kilobyte of data or something, a tiny fraction of it. If you could parse it with AI or machine learning and just map the tags, like this is a down bridge. I don't need to necessarily get a 3D model of it. I just need to let people know like, okay, 26 down power line or power poles need replaced in these sections of road. Just give me the tags and map the tags and skip the imagery, and how would I do that locally on a machine? And just then I could share the tags with people in the location of the tags. And that would be 10 megabytes of data that I could just text somebody rather than like 200 gigs of video that I have to upload to the cloud, if that makes sense. So like, how do we get rid of the imagery and just give me like the relevant information as a location with a note, So and that's mainly because like what we're trying to do is more situational awareness than like the engineers then coming in with an RTK setup and really mapping something in real high detail for like replacement, which is good like 2 weeks after the event rather than 2 days, or where I'm just trying to get you a visual with really crappy air quality when you can't fly a helicopter.
Yeah, in other words, you're doing target collection for follow-on action.
Yeah, and it's just immediate. It's just like, what does this look like right now? And then 2 weeks from now, let's really assess like what's the damage and how do we start bringing in teams and how many tens of millions of dollars of contracts are we going to allocate for all it? I mean, it's like $1 billion to clean up some of these things. So whereas, it's more that, hey, everybody's evacuated from this entire town, and they're not going to come back for 2 weeks, but they really want to know if their house is still there and what their neighborhood looks like. Okay, I can get you that with a panorama and some cops.
Anybody else? I know we have ISR folks on here, so this is your opportunity to kind of see the civil, commercial, less commercial, more civil side of things.
Yeah, and I didn't talk, there are like, you could overlay thermal video. There's a lot of interest in like tracking fire lines and perimeters and more of the active fire like management. And that's more happening inside a CAL FIRE and some of the fire districts. They're coming in at night now and flying with both larger aircraft from, I think they're flying Reapers or something from the National Guard. And that's better for like, okay, you want to fly nighttime and you want to track perimeters and you want to fly for 6 hours. That's like not what a Phantom is good for. That's like a whole different level. This is more like, all right, like what can we do with cheap off the shelf and what's still useful? And then the next step is like, how do we merge all those layers of information? How do I make sure that I'm getting the same kind of data into the workflows that are of these larger aircraft or the manned aircraft or the satellite data? That's the future, is like, let's piece it all together so that we're not creating a silo of information because I'm doing one thing and somebody else is doing another thing and somebody else is doing another thing. which is what happens now.
Yeah, I know military UAS, I believe MQ-9s and want to say maybe even RQ-4 historically have been examples of retasked to look at the California fires for a while now.
Yeah, and those
I mean,
advanced sensors where you could point and get the exact location and trace the perimeter of the fire line, you know, like you can now do that with some of the DJI, like the M300s. We're running into issues now with like not wanting to use DJI products as well. That brings up a whole new issue, is like, okay, how do I not do this with a $1,200 drone? All right, that's much more difficult.
We got into that last week because here in the state of Florida, which our guest was a fire responder here, they just passed legislation in the next 18 months. Any UAS that are used by public agencies need to come off the approved list, which is based off a federal list. So, you know, groups like Department of Interior, Department of Energy, et cetera, they can't just use any system like I believe the DJI products are no bueno in their.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I understand it. We've used wing treads before. I've tried to use EBs, but there's no place to land in these mountainous terrains. I need a vertical takeoff transition vehicle. But most of the law enforcement teams are using lower cost DJI products because that's what they can afford, and they don't fall out of the sky, and they don't cost $120,000. And so it's like, I don't know, for $499 with a Mavic Mini, if you don't care about data privacy over a burned out disaster zone, it doesn't really matter. That's all then politics. That's above I try not to. I'm the data person.
Greg, I got a follow-on question. Do you have any preferred, like, what's your preferred mapping software to use?
Yeah, so I used to work for Pix4D. So if you just want ultra fast offline 2D, if you're just okay with 2D, I would use Pix4D React. It's cheap. It's like $40 or $400 for the year. And it'll stitch everything in like 10 minutes or 15 minutes into a high resolution, full resolution orthomosaic. It works on Mac or PC and it's totally offline. If, however, you want to do something at scale, the new way that I would work is like, I don't care what mission planning app you use. You can use Drone Deploy. You can use Map Pilot. I use a lot. I use SiteScan now, which was 3DR's product that moved to Esri. But predominantly, I need something with terrain following. I have to be able to upload elevation data and make sure that I can map even though it's hilly terrain, because most of these areas are in pretty rugged rural areas. It'd be nice too if I can cache maps and use it offline so that I can save the map in the missions. And then if there's no internet, I'm not grounded. But now I use Esri's SiteScan for cloud processing, which is akin to Pix4D's cloud or Drone Deploy's cloud. And the reason I do that is because you can one button push direct to ArcGIS Online all of your maps. So you load your photos, it'll stitch to your map, and then you can say publish to ArcGIS Online. It'll tile all your maps. Then I can create a map that just says like, okay, let me add this map and that map and this map and this map, and then let me share this publicly. And I've then merged all the information together. I can overlay publicly available property boundaries. And then it's in that. ArcGIS is like the Microsoft Office of mapping software. Like everybody uses it. It's nice and clunky and kind of a pain, but everybody uses it, including big government agencies. So you can get it in that same language that everybody uses, and you can make it shareable to hundreds of thousands or millions of people, and you're not going to crash their servers because they're not some 40-person startup in Palo Alto. They're a big traditional GIS group. So I think that pipeline is the one I would pay the most attention to, because it's the future of like, we can process in the cloud. Esri has a government cloud that eventually SiteScan will be integrated into for security purposes. And then I can push that online, because the only way I can take 300 gigs of maps or 2 terabytes of maps and share it is to get it tiled and get it in the cloud and text a link to somebody. So that data pipeline really has been the last 2 years or year and a half where it's become more mature. And because Esri bought it, it means it's not going to die tomorrow like some of the other startups. It's going to be invested in, and it's part of that workflow, and it's bought into the big gorilla in the room when it comes to geospatial software. And it's not that hard to use. You still don't have to do a master's degree in GIS, although I would recommend, knowing enough about GIS to know what they're talking about, what data formats they need, and like how they're going to use it. So you as a pilot can say, okay, I know enough to collect the proper photos. Now I'm going to hand that off to you, and you do whatever you need to do with it. So I came to GIS kind of late in life, so I know just enough to then know I need to go talk to a really nerdy GIS person if I need to do something really complicated.
Greg, what was that? That was the one you were recommending was the Esri site scan.
Site scan is the one that I would start using.
Cool, thank you.
Outstanding.
What's our stopping point at, Brent?
I was just going to call it. So
Okay.
I just was going to say thank you so much for joining us and really helping to share your perspective and kind of expose our students here to a different side of this, something maybe we haven't put too much thought towards, the data analysis, what to do with it once you've captured it.
Yeah, and I think the data side of drones will be the more high paying side of like, look, what are you going to do when someone just parks a drone out and swarms of them fly autonomously? In the commercial side where I see it eventually, like even now today, like a pilot doesn't make that much money. What makes money is like, how do we be a data analyst and provide actionable intelligence? And understanding the mechanics of the piloting and all of how the data is collected is one piece. The other half is like, now what do we do with it? And then what do we do with it for construction or oil and gas or agriculture or whatever? That's really where I think the value is in the future of the industry. But I'm biased on that. That's my perspective. So.
Well, outstanding. Thank you.
All
Greg.
right, thanks, guys. I'm gonna go finish my beer now.
Enjoy your trip to Hawaii and
yeah, totally. I'm offline now. On Monday I start at Planet Labs, so I'll be doing the satellite side. I'll come back and tell you why drones are adequate. It's all satellites 6 months from now. All right,
Wonderful.
Thanks, Brent. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I really appreciate it. So just real quick comment. I put some questions out there for our 7.3 discussion, your group research project. Make sure you guys look through that and try to answer those questions as soon as you can. Each group received a series of questions to kind of just open up the discussion and add some clarification. The other thing is, remember your big unmanned system research project is due this week. I know last week was a little weird, writing the abstract and the conclusions. And some of you are probably like, why are we doing this? Well, the reason is because you were supposed to be working on the paper the whole time. Now we kind of know. I can tell you this is only the second time we've taught this course, so there's going to be some re-architecture there of that project, just to help normalize it a little bit. Otherwise, really appreciate you guys coming out. This is really the second time we've invited a guest into the class, and I think this is a repeatable recipe for success. So see you all in the classroom.